Oh, this lighting. Oh man, this lighting is an experience, but you know what? This is what you get for filming at 4 p.m. on a day when I could have filmed all day and I just didn't. Anyway, hi, welcome to today's video. It's probably gonna be shorter than the last one because the last one was a monstrosity and I do not have time to do that much research 2 weeks in a row. Today we're gonna talk about sleep and specifically why, as a disabled person, sleep and I are not friends, and the scientific explanations behind that because knowledge is power and that's fun, and then some potential solutions that I found of things that have worked for me. Why are words? I'm having a day today. We're having a day. It's gonna be a good time. I'm excited for a fairly chill video. Hope you are too. Also, I'm a white person in my early 20s with light brown shoulder length hair that is in 2 braids right now, and I'm currently wearing a purple floral dress with spaghetti straps and sitting in front of a bookshelf, and I'm wearing clear round glasses, and one side of my face is very beautifully lit and the other one's kind of in the dark because it's very bright outside. Anyway, sleep. Being well rested is important. We know this. High levels of exhaustion make paying attention harder. They make us more irritable, less focused, less regulated, less able to heal or bounce back from things, and can generally mess with health stuff. And also memory. Sleep helps a lot with encoding memories, if you didn't know that. So ideally, disabled people need to be better at sleeping to be able to function with those disabilities, particularly those with sensory processing issues and chronic illnesses that require more sleep in order to function. Which is why it is supremely annoying that 40 to 80% of autistic people have a sleep disorder, and that those sleep disorders are generally more severe than the general population. And also every single one of my other disabilities and some of the treatments for those disabilities also mess with sleep. Also, I'm going to be talking about how all of my disabilities impact sleep, but I'm going to kind of center it around autism more or less because there is the most body of research there, and more of my disabilities are common comorbidities with autism, so they all sort of branch off of the autism, if that makes any sense. Some sleep disorders that exist include circadian rhythm disorders, where your circadian rhythm or your internal clock is a bit wonky, and your internal clock is part of what tells you when to go to sleep and when to wake up and all of that stuff. So having a wonky rhythm obviously is going to make sleeping more difficult. Alternatively, autistic people in general typically struggle with interoception, which is knowing what our bodies are trying to tell us, and therefore our circadian rhythms could very well just be fine. We just can't feel or pay attention to it. But there's also recent research that suggests that autistic people are more likely to have a rare mutation that causes the irregular secretion of the sleep hormone melatonin, meaning that our bodies produce less sleepiness atypically to begin with, which can cause reduced amounts of sleep and frequent wake-ups, and also taking longer to fall asleep, which kind of ties into the circadian rhythm situation. There's also the element of time blindness that we've spoken about before within a classroom context, but time passes very differently for disabled people in general, hence the creation of the term crip time, and that may also have some impact here. Like, if your body, when it's awake, cannot tell the difference between 15 minutes and 6 hours, in theory, that might be similar when you are also asleep. There's also the executive functioning aspects. Audis and ADHDers, but honestly so many other neurodiversities as well, struggle with executive functioning and general change. This can make switching tasks very difficult, like the transition from day to night, or from actively working on something to laying down and trying to fall asleep. And that can also mess with our circadian rhythms and sleep schedule because it means that bedtime is inconsistent, or when you get tired is inconsistent, because sometimes you might do homework in the evening and fall asleep at 9 because your homework is boring and uninteresting, and another time you could be researching your new special interest and accidentally be up until 11 and still feel super wired even at 11. And then there's also the pathological demand avoidance, persistent demand for autonomy situation of having no control over anything ever, and therefore trying to take control wherever that's possible, often resulting in really late bedtimes or generally harmful sleep routines. Revenge bedtime procrastination, or whatever the heck that thing's called. Other common sleep disorders include movement disorders, which are potentially harmful movements while sleeping, and breathing disorders, which are atypical and difficulties breathing during sleep, which can also make sleep generally not a restful experience. There are also parasomnias, which are sleep disorders that involve undesirable things happening when asleep or when falling asleep, which is the definition I found literally everywhere I looked, even though it is the vaguest possible definition that ever exists, and I'm very unsatisfied by it. But some of the things in this category include excessive nightmares and sleep paralysis and generally very weird dreams. I generally feel like these, particularly the nightmare disorders, are so common in autistic and neurodivergent people because PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which often comes hand in hand with anxiety disorders and most developmental disorders, just due to how the world functions and how we interact with the world and how it treats us, can cause very weird nightmares and dreams. Personally, as a survivor of stuff, if I'm having a bad flashback day, I am going to hold off on going to bed as long as humanly possible because most of my memories come back via dream, or my brain will process the trauma stuff via dream, which is terrifying and horrible, and I hate it. But then the other thing is that the later you stay up in the evening, the worse the anxiety monsters get because you're exhausted, so it's a whole self-fulfilling prophecy of disaster. But anyway, I have a feeling that part of the frequency of nightmares and such probably on some level come from that. The second thing is that a lot of medications have side effects of insomnia and or weird dreams. And I'm not saying this to scare people or be like, hey, go off your medication. I want to be super, super clear about that. Please, stay on your medications if they're helping you. That's important, and I'm not a doctor, and you should, yeah. But it's also important to acknowledge that tons of medications can mess with sleep. Blood pressure and hypertension medications, many arthritis and inflammation medications, most SSRIs, which are typical anxiety, depression medications, but can also be used for other things. And stimulants, such as many ADHD medications, can make sleep wonky. And I know that personally, I started ADHD meds forever ago, and I'm off of them for various reasons. But when I started them, I was on long-acting ones, and I stopped sleeping. So I had to get put on both a lower dose and the short-acting medication, which still made my sleep wonky, and I ended up going off of them for other reasons, but that was part of it. And I've also been on some SSRIs. I tried a couple before I found the one that actually worked for me, that caused really weird and vivid dreams, which in turn were making my anxiety worse, so it kind of negated its own purpose. I'm also not on those anymore. But again, not medical advice, just sharing my experience and saying why disabled people may struggle more with sleep, because a lot of us are on medications in order to make our bodies function properly, or semi-properly, and those can mess with sleep. I saved insomnia as the last sleep disorder to cover here because it's the most common one, with a third of adults reporting symptoms and 6 to 10% fitting the diagnostic qualification for insomnia. It can last for a span of a few weeks, a few months, or can be a persistent lifelong thing, really depends on the person, and it can be struggles either falling asleep or staying asleep. I personally really struggle with falling asleep, and then once I am asleep, I am very unwakeable. And a lot of that has to do with my disabilities. Obviously, there's the anxiety and PTSD and executive functioning aspects that we just talked about earlier that make my brain bad at shutting down at night, but there's also the fact that my entire existence is chronic pain. For example, I have really bad IBS. That's why I can't eat a gazillion different things, but also I'm finding new things every single day that trigger it, or things that I know are going to trigger it that I eat anyway because they're really yummy. So I will make poor choices and promptly regret them. But anyway, a big part of the IBS situation is acid reflux, which gets worse when you're horizontal. And it's unpleasant. And I could fix that with pillows to therefore be less horizontal, but I'm also hypermobile. So being at weird angles makes my joints start to scream and yell at me, particularly my neck, shoulders, hips, and knees. So therefore, to keep everything in line, while I do possess a pillow, I typically sleep completely flat on my belly like a baby in a crib. Which helps the joint pain immensely, and it makes it a lot harder to weirdly like sublux something in my sleep. But it also means that sometimes I wake up with my esophagus on fire from reflux. So it's you never know what you're gonna get. Another thing that I learned while researching for this video is that the link between hypermobility and circulatory issues also impacts sleep. Basically, because hypermobile bodies have a harder time circulating blood, and when we are not actively moving or doing things that help it to circulate, it starts to pool and then circulate worse. The body often compensates for that low blood volume by releasing some adrenaline, which makes us feel more anxious, riled up, and energetic, which makes the whole relaxing enough to fall asleep thing really difficult. Also, weird circulatory issues can cause random cramping, which is terrible. I also find that my sensory issues get infinitely worse once I am laying down and trying to relax. Suddenly I notice every humming appliance and every creak and every tiny light or reflection, and also every single part of my body and the feeling of sheets touching it, or the texture of my pajamas I'm wearing, or the elastic of my socks. And the more that I relax, the more the changes in that sensory input completely jolt me awake and start my heart pumping, and then the longer it takes to relax again. And then there's also like the shutting off of my racing brain thing, which has always been really difficult for me, because in case you cannot tell by my energy, if I'm not doing 700 things at once, I will explode. So turning that off at night does not work very well. I keep pens and sticky notes by my bed at all times in case I have random ideas that come up while I'm trying to fall asleep, so I can write them down and then stop thinking about them. But the thing that's hardest to quantify for me is the chronic fatigue aspect. My body is thoroughly exhausted all the time. Yes, I still function at this level of energy all the time, but I am also exhausted. But I'm not sleepy exhausted, I'm just exhausted. So I spend all day taking it slow, pacing my energy, being like, wow, I'm so exhausted, I'm gonna get a really good night's sleep tonight. And then I get into bed and my body is like, bro, you're not sleepy, why are you doing this? This is stupid. And then I lie awake for a while thinking about how tired I am. And no matter how well I sleep, I also will wake up exhausted anyway. So then I don't wake up and get right out of bed, and then I flop around for a while, which is then when the really weird dreams and disrupted sleep happen, which make me feel worse when I do get up. But then at the same time, they make me oversleep technically, so in order to get things done that day, I have to stay up later, and then the cycle continues. And I'm a mess. Now, all of this is not to say that sleep is impossible or that we should give up on the concept of sleep, because as we said early on in this video, it's kind of really important. It's more of a, hey, if you struggle with sleep, there's a scientific reason for that, so you don't need to feel frustrated with yourself about it. You're not broken, it's just how disability works, you know? And also because knowing the causes of things can help us to find more ways to accommodate for them and therefore make our lives a little bit easier. Now, the general things we've all heard for forever are to try to have a consistent sleep schedule. This helps with circadian rhythm and routines and whatnot. I personally have a consistent wake up time every day. My bedtime is sketchy at best. I'm really trying to fix that. It's not working. But at the times in my life where I have been consistent with my sleep schedule, I have felt a whole lot physically better than I generally do on a typical day. It's just really hard to stick to. Other general things that I saw everywhere were like, be careful with your naps. And I know that there's a lot of things about productive naps and ways to nap. I find that naps make my life terrible, so I don't do them unless I'm physically incapable of remaining conscious, which is very rare at this point in my life. But if you're a napper, pay attention to that, I guess. People also say to pay attention to your caffeine consumption. That is also important. If I consume caffeine, I pass out almost immediately because that's how my body works. Unless it's a migraine medication, then it does the opposite. So I'm not great for advice on this one. But one pro tip is, if you didn't know this, decaf coffee or tea is usually just half the caffeine content, not caffeine free. And if you're a hot cocoa person, Swiss Miss is listed as 99.9% caffeine free, but it still has enough caffeine to make me sick, and Nestle hot chocolate does not. So that might just be a me thing, but I shared here anyway if anybody is on a quest for hot cocoa. If you are a regular melatonin or otherwise sleep medication user, pay attention to how much you are using those, because reliance on sleep medications obviously makes the body worse at doing the sleep thing naturally on its own, which becomes an issue in the long run. There's also the whole only use your bed for sleeping, not for sitting or studying thing, which I cannot express how important this is on so many levels, because if you only use it for sleeping, when you get into your bed, your body goes, oh wow, this is where sleeping happens. Must be sleepy time, and you actually are more likely to fall asleep more easily. With chronic illnesses that involve a lot of sleeping, this gets a bit more tricky because you kind of spend significantly more time just kind of laying in bed. My current solution is that I have my bed lofted pretty high, so it takes effort to get up there, which means that I never accidentally sit on it during the day because it's easy. I also have lots of other comfy places to sit or lay down in my room, so when I'm exhausted I can go there instead and not disrupt my official sleepy place. Also, no matter how exhausted I am during the day, I try to get out a little bit and at least get some sunshine if I am unable to exercise, so that I have more reason to be physically tired at the end of the day. Some research says don't exercise directly before bed. I tend to do a full little workout directly before bed. It works really well for me, so you do you. If you're wondering what my routine is, I do 30 sit-ups, a 60-second plank, and then some like yoga and stretching right before I go to bed. It's really great. I really like it a lot. But those are the general like life tips. The more specific pre-bed tips include avoiding blue light right before bed. I personally use a blue light filter on my computer called Flux. That's F.LUX. I have it turned all the way down to the lowest setting. It is amazing for my sleep schedule and also helps a ton with strain headaches, which has minimized migraine days for me like exponentially since I first started using it. Also, generally dimming your lights, like going from overhead lights to fairy lights or a lamp in the evening, will help with your circadian rhythm as well. Another pro tip is to not eat or drink anything starting an hour before you go to bed. Then you're not going to wake up having to pee, you're going to have an easier time managing reflux, and won't eat something that makes you feel more awake directly before trying to go to sleep. I also learned in researching for this that bodies cool themselves down to feel sleepy, so lowering this thermostat or opening a window can help relax into bedtime. And speaking of bedtime, because I don't like how listy this video is, so I'm trying to make things flow, but they're not flowing. Keep a consistent bedtime routine. Like my bedtime, all over the place, but I always turn off half my fairy lights, go to the bathroom, wash my face, brush my teeth, put on my PJs, journal, go to the bathroom again, turn off my lights, work out, then go to sleep. And my body knows that that is the sleepy time routine, so every time I start to follow it, whether that's at 8:30 p.m. or 11 p.m., I start to get sleepy, so by the time it's done, I am very sleepy. It's great. I highly recommend. Speaking of sleepy, if you get really sleepy and tired at 9 p.m. but your usual bedtime isn't until 10, go to bed at 9 anyway. Otherwise, you're likely to push past that sleepiness and then you're gonna stay up really late by accident. It's better to just do what your body is trying to tell you to do, even though that's annoying and difficult and not fun. I also have this thing called the 9:15 p.m. rule that I highly recommend implementing. The idea that is that all anxiety and depression and everything else tend to get more spirally later in the evening because we're more exhausted. So that is consistently when I cry the most, when I make the worst and most impulsive decisions. And this is a phenomenon for most humans. So I have a rule that any big thought with consequences, whether that's everybody hates me or I'm going to go chop off all my hair, if the thought happens after 9:15 p.m., It doesn't count, it's not a real thought, and if I start having a bunch of those thoughts at the same time, it means it's time to go to bed. Absolute life changer of a rule, has saved me so many unnecessary panic attacks and stupid decisions over something very teeny tiny that felt very big at the time because I was sleepy. Also, to avoid laying in the bed anxiety spiraling situation, I journal before bed every day just to like write down things that happened. Sometimes I'll delve into how I feel about them, but it's usually just like here's all the events of the day. And then I list 3 things at the end of like 3 really good things or things that made me happy that happened that day. The whole thing takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes, and it makes me feel a lot more centered when I actually go to bed because I'm pretty much done processing what happened that day already, and by writing it down, my brain can like just forget about it. And then that leaves me thinking about the 3 or so nice things that happened, so I'm more likely to think happy thoughts or have nice dreams. I also tend to run through plots of shows or books in my head in like excruciating detail as I fall asleep. For some reason that works really well for me. There's also research into the fact that pets in your bed make it both harder to fall asleep and make for less good sleep, so try to keep your beds in their own pets. Yep, try to keep your pets in their own beds if you can. I read in a lot of places and have also been told throughout my life that if you can't fall asleep after trying for 20-ish minutes, you should get up and do something calming like reading a book or listening to music and then going back to trying to sleep again. I conceptually understand that because you don't want to like flop around like a fish for hours on end in your bed. That's not healthy and your bed's going to become a place of anxiety. I get it. But at the same time, doing that means knowing the difference between 5 and 25 minutes when laying in bed, which I don't. And also if I get up, I'm inevitably going to check what time it is on my phone, which is in the blue light thing. And this method has never worked for me. My go-to things are turning on a fan and pointing it not at me because cold on my body makes me all crunchy, which doesn't feel great in the long run. But like at the same time, having it nearby, like generally near my head, is white noise. It helps my brain to focus on that and relax rather than focus on like everything that hurts or all of the other noises that are going on at the same time because it kind of blocks those out a little bit. I also learned a breathing trick when I was little that's like 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale, and doing that for 5 minutes, and that usually knocks me out within maybe 10 of those breaths. I'm fast asleep. If a major issue for you is waking up, which same, I have a great app, it's called Alarmy, where you can adjust the amount of times it's allowed to snooze and for how long it can snooze for, and in order to turn it off you have to complete a specific task. So I have 2 alarms. My first alarm is on a 3 snooze maximum and has 3-minute long snooze periods rather than the traditional 9 minutes, and I have to solve 6 2-digit addition problems in order to shut it off, and the alarm plays while you do the math. Also, I put my phone on the other side of my room, so I have to get up to go get it. My second alarm is the same snooze situation, and it does not turn off until I scan the code on the bottom of a bottle of whiteout that here lives across my room on the other side of my phone, so it's as far from my bed as possible. At home, I usually put it down the hall. Highly recommend. The app is free. It has been a lifesaver. But anyway, I will say before we end this video that there's an element of like, oh, if these things don't work for me, or I've tried everything and it's not working, this is my fault, or generally giving up on trying or caring because it takes a lot of effort. So what's the point? And like, everybody's care plan for their own struggles is super unique, and you know yourself better than anybody else does. And if common and generalized sleep tips don't help you, that does not mean that you are broken or that you don't deserve to feel nice. It just means that you need something else that's different to work for you. In the same way that some of the things I listed here are not accommodating to how I live my life or how life as a disabled person actually works. And that is just part of the adventure of being a human being in general. So, if you have any tips, feel free to put them in the comments below. I hope that this video was somewhat helpful. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over. And I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.